Blood trickled down Zara's face as her beautiful braids fell to the floor. Officer Caldwell smiled, scissors in hand. The school auditorium fell silent. None of the students moved to help the sobbing teenager. No one knew her father had just parked outside, badge in hand. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose injustice. Can you imagine what happens when an FBI chief walks in to find his daughter bleeding? Stay tuned to witness how karma strikes back against those who abuse their power. Zara Washington stared at her reflection in the mirror, adjusting her freshly done box braids one last time. At 15 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied the anxiety bubbling inside her stomach. Today wasn't just any school day at Westridge Academy. It was the day of the annual speech competition. And Zara had spent weeks perfecting her words. Westridge was an elite, predominantly white school in Virginia, where Zara attended on a full academic scholarship. Her room was littered with drafts of her speech on racial injustice in America, each page filled with powerful words drawn from personal experiences and meticulous research. "You ready, sweetheart?" her father called from downstairs. Marcus Washington had recently been appointed as the FBI Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Division, a position that filled Zara with immense pride but also placed an unspoken weight on her shoulders. Marcus entered her room, his tall frame filling the doorway as he straightened his immaculate suit. "Your speech is going to change minds today," he said, reading over her final draft. His eyes crinkled with pride, but his expression quickly turned serious. "Just remember what we talked about. Some people aren't ready to hear the truth, especially from a young black voice. Stay strong, but stay safe." Zara nodded, understanding the double meaning in his words. They'd had many conversations about navigating predominantly white spaces, about how her words would be scrutinized differently than those of her classmates. The morning of the speech competition arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze. As Zara walked through the hallways of Westridge Academy, she could feel eyes following her. "Did you actually write that yourself?" asked Taylor, a blonde girl from her English class, voice dripping with faux innocence. "Or did your dad help you?" "It seemed so professional when you practiced yesterday." Zara took a deep breath, pushing down the familiar sting. "Every word is mine," she replied calmly, continuing toward the auditorium. Her English teacher, Mr. Patterson, stopped her at the door. "Zara, I just want to make sure you understand the importance of objectivity in academic presentations. Your topic is quite passionate." His emphasis on the last word made it sound like a flaw. "I understand completely, Mr. Patterson. My speech includes 36 cited sources and statistics from the Department of Justice." Zara responded, maintaining eye contact despite her racing heart. The morning assembly brought another surprise when Principal Hartwell introduced a new addition to the school staff. "Students, please welcome Officer Richard Caldwell, our new school resource officer. He comes to us with 15 years of experience, and will be ensuring our campus remains safe and orderly." Officer Caldwell stood at attention, his blue uniform crisp, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he surveyed the student body. Something about his gaze made Zara shiver imperceptibly. Throughout the morning, Zara noticed Officer Caldwell in the hallways, his attention seemingly drawn to the handful of black and brown students. When Justin, a white senior, sprinted down the hall clearly late for class, Caldwell merely nodded at him. But when Darius, one of the few other black students, walked briskly without running, Caldwell stopped him, demanding to see a hall pass. By lunchtime, a pattern had emerged that Zara couldn't ignore, but she pushed these observations aside. She needed to focus on her speech. The competition began after lunch. One by one, students presented their carefully prepared speeches on climate change, social media ethics, and other safe topics that prompted polite applause. When Zara's name was called, she walked to the podium with her head high, painfully aware of Officer Caldwell standing at the back of the auditorium, arms crossed. Selective justice. The invisible shackles of modern America, Zara began, her voice clear and unwavering. For the next 7 minutes, she delivered statistics about racial disparities in the criminal justice system, wove in historical context about Jim Crow laws and their modern equivalents, and shared her own experiences of being followed in stores and pulled over in cars where white friends drove unbothered. Justice wears a blindfold not to be impartial, she concluded, but to avoid seeing the truth of who fills our prisons, who fears our police, and who still waits for America to fulfill its promise of equality. A beat of silence followed her final words before the auditorium erupted. Students rose to their feet, applause thundering through the room. Even some teachers joined the standing ovation, visibly moved. But from her position at the podium, Zara didn't miss the tight expressions of Principal Hartwell and Officer Caldwell, who exchanged concerned glances rather than applause. When the judges announced the results after all presentations, Zara won first place, despite an awkward pause and some obvious hesitation from the panel. As she accepted her certificate, she caught Officer Caldwell whispering something to Principal Hartwell, both men watching her with eyes that held anything but congratulations. The victory still humming through her veins, Zara stepped into the hallway and immediately pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed her father's number, excitement temporarily overwhelming her usual composure. "Dad! I won first place," she exclaimed when Marcus answered. His deep laugh warmed her ear. "That's my girl. I knew you would. Those judges didn't stand a chance against your truth." Pride radiated through his voice. "I've got a budget meeting until 4. But then I'm coming straight to school. We're celebrating tonight. Your choice of restaurant." Zara grinned, already mentally scrolling through her favorite places. "Deal. See you later, Dad." As she ended the call, she didn't notice Officer Caldwell watching her from the water fountain. His eyes narrowed as he made a note in a small pad. The rest of the afternoon took a strange turn. Zara noticed Officer Caldwell appearing wherever she went. When she walked to her locker, he was checking the fire extinguisher nearby. When she entered the library, he was suddenly interested in the reference section. Each time, he seemed to be making notes. During her chemistry class, Zara received a text from her best friend Emily. "That new cop is being weird." He asked Ms. Brennan if there were dress code rules about elaborate hairstyles. "What's his deal?" Zara felt a chill run through her body, automatically reaching up to touch her braids. When the bell rang, Emily waited for her outside class, her freckled face pinched with concern. "He's targeting you because of your speech," she whispered as they walked toward the cafeteria. "It was amazing, by the way. You said everything I've been too scared to say." As the two girls entered the lunch line, Officer Caldwell appeared, positioning himself directly behind Zara. "Miss Washington," he said loudly enough for nearby students to hear, "I need to speak with you about a violation of school policy." Zara turned, maintaining her composure despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "What policy would that be, Officer Caldwell?" she asked politely. "Your hairstyle." He gestured to her braids with his pen. "Westridge Academy has clear guidelines about extreme hairstyles that cause distraction in the learning environment." Emily stepped forward. "Her hair isn't a distraction. It's just her hair." Officer Caldwell's eyes flicked dismissively toward Emily. "This doesn't concern you, Miss Roberts," Emily supplied, lifting her chin despite her trembling voice. "And Zara's my friend, so it does concern me." Caldwell's face hardened. "One more word and you'll be joining her in detention." Emily fell silent, shooting Zara an apologetic look. The cafeteria had grown quiet, dozens of eyes watching the confrontation. Zara took a steadying breath, channeling her father's professional calm. "Officer Caldwell, I believe you may not be familiar with the Crown Act that protects black hairstyles from discrimination. My braids are a protected cultural hairstyle, and don't violate any lawful school policy." A flash of something dangerous crossed Caldwell's face. Are you lecturing me on the law, young lady? He asked, stepping closer. I'm simply stating facts, Zara replied, working to keep her voice even despite the growing knot in her stomach. I'd be happy to discuss this with Principal Hartwell if there's confusion about the policy. That's an excellent idea, Caldwell said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Let's go see him right now. He spoke into his radio, requesting the principal meet them. As they walked through the cafeteria, Zara quickly pulled out her phone and sent a text to her father. Something weird happening. Officer targeting me about my hair. Coming to your office after school instead of waiting. She hit send just as they reached Principal Hartwell's office, where he stood waiting with a concerned expression. What seems to be the problem, Officer Caldwell? The principal asked, ushering them inside. Miss Washington is in violation of our dress code with this hairstyle, Caldwell stated firmly. And she's being insubordinate about it, citing laws at me instead of complying with school policy. Principal Hartwell looked uncomfortable, glancing between Zara and Officer Caldwell. Zara, you know we value diversity at Westridge, but we do have standards of appearance that apply to everyone. Zara straightened her spine. Sir, with all respect, the Crown Act specifically protects black hairstyles from this exact type of discrimination. My braids are neat, clean, and part of my cultural identity. Principal Hartwell shifted in his seat. Zara could see he recognized the legal implications, but something else seemed to be weighing more heavily on his mind. Officer Caldwell is new to our school, and we need to support his authority as he establishes himself with the student body, he finally said. I think it would be best if you agreed to modify your hairstyle by tomorrow. Zara felt a surge of disbelief. You're asking me to cut my hair because he's uncomfortable with it? That's textbook discrimination, sir. Officer Caldwell's hand suddenly shot out, grabbing Zara's phone from her pocket. No phones during disciplinary meetings. That's another violation. You can't take my property, Zara protested, reaching for her phone. Caldwell held it away. School policy allows confiscation of devices used during school hours. He checked the screen, his expression darkening when he saw her text to her father. Attempting to escalate a minor school matter to an FBI agent. That's a serious breach of protocol. What had begun as an intimidation tactic was rapidly spiraling into something more sinister. The secretary appeared at the door. Ms. Henderson from Math and Coach Brooks are here. They heard there was an issue with a student. More staff began filtering into the office, creating an audience. Principal Hartwell seemed caught between protocols and the growing spectacle. What Zara didn't know was that her father had already responded to her text, on my way. Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. I'll be there in 30 minutes. But with her phone confiscated, the message remained unseen as the situation continued to escalate beyond anything she could have anticipated. Principal Hartwell's office grew more crowded as additional staff members filed in, creating an audience for what was quickly becoming a public tribunal. Zara remained standing, acutely aware of being surrounded by authority figures, all of whom were white except for the Spanish teacher, Ms. Rivera, who watched with growing concern from the corner. This has gone on long enough, Officer Caldwell declared, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. The student continues to be defiant about a simple dress code violation. He turned to Principal Hartwell. Sir, if we don't address this immediately, what message does that send to the rest of the student body? Principal Hartwell rubbed his temples, clearly uncomfortable with the growing spectacle but unwilling to contradict the officer. What do you suggest, Officer Caldwell? He finally asked, abdicating responsibility in a way that sent a chill down Zara's spine. Caldwell's lips curled into what might generously be called a smile. The dress code violation is the hair. The simplest solution is to remove the violation. He reached into his utility belt and withdrew a pair of scissors that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. We have precedent for this. Johnson County High made national news last year when they required a wrestler to cut his dreadlocks before a match. Ms. Rivera stepped forward, her voice tight with restrained anger. That case resulted in a lawsuit and widespread condemnation. The coach was suspended. You cannot seriously be suggesting cutting this child's hair against her will. Officer Caldwell turned his cold gaze toward the teacher. Ms. Rivera, isn't it? This is a matter of school security and policy enforcement, not foreign language instruction. Your input isn't required. Principal Hartwell cleared his throat. Ms. Rivera, while I appreciate your concern, Officer Caldwell is correct that we need to address policy violations consistently. His eyes avoided Zara's. Officer, you have my permission to enforce the dress code as needed. Ms. Rivera's face strained of color. If you do this, I will report it to the school board and the Department of Education. This is a clear violation of your job is at will, Ms. Rivera, Principal Hartwell interrupted smoothly. I'd hate to see your contract not renewed over a misunderstanding of school policy enforcement procedures. The threat hung in the air, silencing the only ally in the room. Zara felt panic rising in her chest, but fought to maintain her composure. My hair has cultural and personal significance, she stated clearly, making sure everyone in the room heard her. The Crown Act specifically protects black hairstyles from discrimination in schools and workplaces. What you're suggesting is not only morally wrong but illegal. Officer Caldwell's expression hardened. That's enough. Your continued defiance shows this needs to be addressed more publicly. He grabbed Zara's arm, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. Let's make this a teachable moment for everyone. He spoke into his radio. All students report to the auditorium immediately for an emergency assembly on respecting authority. Caldwell marched Zara through the hallways, Principal Hartwell and the other staff following behind like a grotesque parade. Students stared as they passed, confusion and concern on many faces. A few pulled out phones, but quickly put them away when Officer Caldwell glared in their direction. The auditorium filled rapidly with confused students and teachers. Emily slipped into a seat near the front, her face pale with worry as she watched Zara being led onto the stage. Once the room was full, Officer Caldwell positioned Zara on a chair in the center of the stage, the bright lights making her feel exposed and vulnerable. Today, we're having an important lesson about respecting authority, Caldwell announced, his voice echoing through the sound system. Miss Washington here believes she doesn't need to follow school policies. She thinks her speech about so-called injustice puts her above the rules that everyone else follows. He circled Zara like a predator. When rules are broken, there are consequences. Emily, hidden in the front row, slowly slid her phone out, keeping it concealed under her desk as she began recording. On stage, Officer Caldwell produced a pair of handcuffs. For everyone's safety, including her own, he announced, securing Zara's wrists to the arms of the chair. The metal bit into her skin, cold and unyielding. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Darius, a senior and one of the few other black students, stood up. This isn't right. You can't restrain a student for a dress code violation. Several other students voiced agreement, the murmurs growing louder. Silence, Caldwell bellowed. Anyone who disrupts this assembly will face immediate suspension. Principal Hartwell, please confirm this policy. Put on the spot, Principal Hartwell stepped forward, his expression strained but his voice firm. Officer Caldwell has full authority to maintain order and enforce school policies. Any student who interferes will face serious disciplinary action. The threat effectively silenced the protests, though the tension in the room remained palpable. Zara could see the fear and confusion on her classmates' faces, could feel their helplessness mirroring her own. Officer Caldwell retrieved his scissors and moved behind Zara. The dress code clearly prohibits extreme hairstyles that cause distraction in the learning environment. These braids, he grasped one of Zara's braids roughly, are in violation of that policy. With theatrical slowness, he positioned the scissors at the base of a braid and began to cut. The sound of metal slicing through hair seemed unnaturally loud in the silent auditorium. The first braid fell to the floor, and Zara bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. These fancy hairstyles might be acceptable in other places, Caldwell continued, cutting another braid with deliberate slowness, but at Westridge Academy, we have standards. Braid after braid fell to the floor as he worked his way across her head, making comments about taming wild hair and learning to fit in. When the scissors nicked Zara's scalp, she couldn't suppress a small gasp of pain. A trickle of blood ran down her forehead, visible to the horrified students watching. Instead of stopping, Caldwell continued, seemingly unbothered by the injury. Sometimes lessons require a little discomfort to sink in, he remarked, cutting another section. Despite the humiliation and pain, Zara refused to break down completely. She held her head as high as the handcuffs would allow, tears streaming silently down her face as she recited in a clear voice, "Justice wears a blindfold not to be impartial, but to avoid seeing the truth of who fills our prisons, who fears our police, and who still waits for America to fulfill its promise of equality." Her words from the speech competition echoed through the stunned auditorium. From his position at the side of the stage, Principal Hartwell watched with growing alarm. The situation had escalated far beyond what he had anticipated, but he remained frozen in place, unwilling to challenge Caldwell's authority even as blood dripped onto the student's collar. "Are you outraged by what Officer Caldwell is doing to Zara?" Comment number 1 if you think this is a clear case of racial discrimination that should never be allowed in our schools. Hit that like button if you're waiting for justice to be served. And subscribe to see more stories about standing up against systemic racism. What do you think will happen when Zara's FBI father discovers what's being done to his daughter? Let's find out what happens next when Marcus Washington arrives at the school. Marcus Washington's phone buzzed with multiple notifications while he sat in a budget meeting at FBI headquarters. Normally, he wouldn't check messages during a federal briefing, but something made him glance down. What he saw made his blood run cold, 3 messages from names he recognized as Zara's friends, all with variations of "emergency at school" and "Zara in trouble." Then he saw the earlier text from Zara herself about the officer targeting her hair. His instincts, honed through 20 years of FBI work, screamed that something was seriously wrong. "Excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. "Family emergency." The other agents nodded respectfully as he strode from the room, already dialing the school's number. "Westridge Academy, how may I direct your call?" the secretary answered pleasantly. "This is Deputy Director Marcus Washington of the FBI. I need to speak with my daughter, Zara Washington, immediately." His voice was calm but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't pull students from class without proper. This is an emergency. Put her on the phone now." The secretary's voice changed, becoming guarded. "I believe Zara is currently involved in a disciplinary matter with Principal Hartwell and Officer Caldwell. I can take a message." Marcus cut her off. "What kind of disciplinary matter requires a police officer?" The secretary hesitated. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss ongoing disciplinary proceedings." "I'm sure Principal Hartwell will call you when—" Marcus ended the call, already moving toward the parking garage. He activated the emergency protocol he'd hoped never to use. First calling the local FBI field office. "This is Deputy Director Washington. I need agents at Westridge Academy immediately. Possible civil rights violation in progress involving my minor daughter." Next, he called the local police chief, a woman he'd worked with on community relations initiatives. "Chief Reynolds, I need officers at Westridge Academy right away. The school resource officer may be overstepping his authority with a student. My daughter." As Marcus drove, breaking speed limits with his FBI credentials clearly displayed on the dashboard, he used voice commands to research Westridge Academy's policies on his phone. Display Westridge Academy's Student Handbook, section on dress code. The relevant section appeared on his screen, and he quickly noted that while the dress code mentioned extreme hairstyles, it also included language about respecting cultural differences and complying with applicable laws. He also pulled up the text of the Crown Act, confirming that Virginia had indeed adopted the legislation protecting black hairstyles from discrimination. By the time Marcus arrived at Westridge Academy 12 minutes later, his professional demeanor had fully taken over, channeling his parental rage into focused determination. He parked haphazardly near the front entrance, his FBI badge already in hand as he approached the security desk. "Sir, you need to sign in," and the security guard began. Marcus held up his credentials. "FBI Deputy Director Marcus Washington." "Where is the auditorium?" The guard's eyes widened in recognition. "Director Washington? I saw you on the news last month." "The auditorium is down that hallway, but there's an assembly in progress and we've been told not to allow interruptions." "What kind of assembly?" Marcus asked, already moving in the direction indicated. The guard hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Something about discipline and respect for authority. That new resource officer called it suddenly. Seemed strange to me, but..." He shrugged apologetically. "Go ahead, sir." Second set of doors on the right. Marcus could hear a man's voice echoing through the auditorium doors as he approached. "These fancy hairstyles might be acceptable in other places, but at Westridge Academy, we have standards." Something in the tone sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He pushed open the doors and took in the scene before him in an instant, his daughter handcuffed to a chair on stage, blood trickling down her face. A white officer standing over her with scissors in hand, and a pile of braids on the floor. The sight hit him with the force of a physical blow. For a single heartbeat. He was just a father witnessing his child's suffering, rage and horror threatening to overwhelm his training. Then, like a switch being flipped, FBI Deputy Director Washington took control. He strode down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent auditorium. Students turned to stare, whispers spreading like wildfire as they recognized him from news reports about his recent appointment. Officer Caldwell, still holding the scissors, didn't immediately register the newcomer's significance. "Sir, this assembly is mandatory for students and staff only. You'll need to leave," and FBI Deputy Director Marcus Washington. He interrupted, his voice carrying throughout the room without shouting as he held up his credentials. "And you are assaulting my daughter." Caldwell's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something close to fear. "This is a school disciplinary matter," he stammered, lowering the scissors slightly. "The student was in violation of dress code policies and you decided handcuffing a minor and forcibly cutting her hair was an appropriate response." Marcus climbed the steps to the stage, his movements controlled despite the fury evident in his eyes. "Step away from my daughter. Now." When Caldwell hesitated, Marcus's voice hardened further. "That wasn't a request. It was an order from a federal officer who believes he's witnessing a civil rights violation in progress." The doors at the back of the auditorium opened as local police officers responded to Marcus's earlier call. "Secure the officer," Marcus directed them, his tone leaving no room for question despite the jurisdictional complications. The local officers, recognizing both his authority and the disturbing scene before them, moved quickly to comply. "Richard Caldwell, you're being detained pending investigation of assault on a minor and civil rights violations," the lead officer announced, taking the scissors and applying handcuffs to the now protesting school resource officer. Marcus immediately turned to Zara, producing a small key from his pocket that worked on standard-issue handcuffs. As he freed her wrists, he spoke softly, for her ears only. "I'm here now. You're safe." The professional mask slipped just enough to show the father beneath before he composed himself again, removing his suit jacket to drape it around her shoulders, covering her damaged hair and the blood on her collar. Principal Hartwell rushed forward, his face a mask of concern that hadn't been present minutes earlier. "Director Washington, there seems to be a terrible misunderstanding. Officer Caldwell was simply enforcing school policies, perhaps with excessive zeal, but save it," Marcus cut him off, his voice arctic. "FBI agents are already en route. This incident will be thoroughly investigated." He turned to the stunned audience of students and teachers. "If anyone recorded what happened here today, please preserve that evidence. FBI agents will be collecting witness statements." A low murmur spread through the crowd as students glanced at each other, several nodding slightly to indicate they had indeed captured footage. Emily stood up from her front row seat, holding up her phone. "I have the whole thing, sir," she called out, her voice shaking but determined. "From when they first brought her in." Marcus nodded gratefully in her direction as he guided Zara toward the exit. The sound of sirens announced the arrival of additional law enforcement, and the FBI civil rights team Marcus had summoned. As they reached the door, Marcus turned back to address the still shocked audience one final time. What happened here today wasn't discipline. It wasn't about a dress code. It was a public humiliation with racial undertones. And it will not stand. His voice carried the weight of not just parental authority, but the full force of federal law. This school will be held accountable. Within 20 minutes of Marcus Washington's arrival, Westridge Academy transformed from an elite educational institution to what resembled a federal crime scene. FBI agents in dark suits moved efficiently through the building, securing evidence and establishing a perimeter around the auditorium. The school was placed under temporary lockdown, with students kept in their classrooms as the situation unfolded. Marcus escorted Zara to the nurse's office, where a medical technician from the FBI team carefully documented and treated the lacerations on her scalp. "These cuts aren't deep enough to need stitches," the technician explained, applying antiseptic that made Zara wince. "But we should have a doctor examine them anyway." Zara sat silently, shock still evident in her eyes as she occasionally reached up to touch the uneven patches where her braids had been. Marcus maintained his professional composure, though the muscle working in his jaw betrayed his contained fury. "We'll get you proper medical attention," he assured her, "but first I need to make sure this scene is properly secured." Outside in the hallway, Officer Caldwell was creating a commotion as FBI agents prepared to transport him for questioning. "This is completely inappropriate interference in a school disciplinary matter," he shouted, straining against his handcuffs. "I was enforcing established school policies with the full authorization of the principal." An FBI agent named Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, forcibly cutting a minor's hair while she's restrained, causing physical injury, goes well beyond any reasonable interpretation of school policy enforcement. Now please lower your voice or we'll add resisting federal officers to your growing list of problems." As Caldwell was being escorted toward the exit, he suddenly broke away and attempted to flee down a side corridor. His escape lasted approximately 7 seconds before 2 agents intercepted him, adding attempted flight to the situation report. In the administrative offices, Principal Hartwell was frantically making calls, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "Gerald, I need you to convene an emergency meeting of the school board," he said urgently to the board president. "We have a situation that could potentially generate significant liability for the district." He lowered his voice, glancing nervously at the FBI agent stationed outside his door. "Yes, it involves Marcus Washington's daughter. No, I didn't know who she was when I authorized. Listen. Just get the board together and call our attorneys." Outside the school, news vans had already begun to arrive, tipped off by parents who had received alarming text messages from their children inside. Among the reporters setting up cameras was Alicia Daniels, who recognized Marcus immediately when he stepped outside to coordinate with the local police. "Marcus?" she called out, breaking protocol to use his first name. "Alicia," he acknowledged with surprise. They had attended Howard University together 20 years earlier. "What happened in there?" she asked, her journalistic instincts momentarily overridden by personal concern when she noticed the grim set of his mouth. "I can't comment officially right now," Marcus replied, maintaining his professional boundaries despite their history. "But I can tell you that a serious civil rights violation occurred involving a student." He didn't need to specify that the student was his daughter. The speed and scale of the FBI response made that connection obvious to anyone familiar with his position. Inside the school, social media was doing what it does best despite the lockdown, spreading information at lightning speed. Videos of Officer Caldwell cutting Zara's hair had already been uploaded to multiple platforms. With hashtags #JusticeForZara and #WestridgeRacism trending locally within the hour, parents began arriving in droves, demanding to know why their children were being kept in the school and what exactly had happened. As the FBI established a temporary command center in the school library, Emily was brought in to provide her video evidence. "I started recording as soon as I realized what they were going to do," she explained, her voice still shaking slightly. "I kept my phone under the desk so they wouldn't see." The agent interviewing her nodded appreciatively as she transferred the video files. "This is extremely helpful. Can you tell me if this type of incident has happened before at Westridge?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Not exactly like this. But Officer Caldwell has been targeting black and brown students since he started last week. And there's always been comments from teachers, different discipline for different students." The agent made careful notes, asking Emily for specific examples and names of other students who might have similar experiences. Meanwhile, Ms. Rivera approached the FBI team, visibly nervous but determined. "I tried to stop it," she said without preamble. "I need you to know that I objected strongly to what Officer Caldwell proposed. But Principal Hartwell threatened my job." She produced a small notebook from her purse. "I've been documenting concerning incidents at this school for 3 years. Racial disparities in discipline. Comments from staff, complaints from minority students that were dismissed. I was building a case to present to the school board, but after today..." The agent accepted the notebook with interest. "This could establish a pattern of behavior, Ms. Rivera. Thank you for coming forward." As word spread through the student body, other black students began asking to speak with the investigators. Darius, the senior who had initially stood up during the assembly, provided a detailed account of his experiences with discrimination at Westridge. "It's always been there, but more subtle, you know. Until Officer Caldwell came. He made it obvious. Yesterday he stopped me 3 times between classes to check my hall pass. 3 times in one day. While white kids were running past us without any passes at all." Despite the trauma she had experienced, Zara insisted on giving a formal statement before leaving for medical treatment. Her voice remained steady as she recounted the events leading up to and including the assault, her natural eloquence evident even in crisis. "I believe Officer Caldwell targeted me specifically because of my speech about racial injustice," she concluded. "The timing and his specific focus on my hair, which is protected under the Crown Act, suggests this was retaliation rather than legitimate enforcement of school policy." The FBI agent interviewing her couldn't hide her impression. "You speak very well under pressure, Zara." "I've had practice," Zara replied simply. "Being black in America is a constant pressure test." By early evening, the situation had escalated to national proportions. The superintendent of schools arrived looking visibly shaken, having been summoned from a conference in another state. An emergency meeting of the school board was convened at district headquarters, with attorneys present and a crowd of angry parents gathered outside. As the FBI expanded their investigation, they uncovered troubling information about Officer Caldwell's past. Records showed he had been the subject of multiple complaints at 2 previous schools but had been allowed to resign quietly each time rather than face formal discipline. Principal Hartwell's communications painted an equally concerning picture. FBI digital forensics specialists, armed with warrants based on the evidence of civil rights violations, found emails in which Hartwell discussed strategies for maintaining the traditional culture of Westridge by discouraging certain elements from becoming too prominent in the student body. By nightfall, the story had been picked up by national news networks. Footage of Zara, jacket draped over her damaged hair and dried blood still visible on her forehead, being escorted from the school by her father played on screens across America. The contrast between her dignity and the shocking nature of what had happened to her resonated with viewers of all backgrounds. As Marcus finally drove Zara home after a doctor's examination confirmed no serious physical injuries, he glanced at his daughter in the passenger seat. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," he said quietly. "I'm supposed to protect you from exactly this kind of injustice." Zara looked over at her father, exhaustion evident in her eyes but also a newfound resolve. "You did protect me," she replied. "You came when I needed you. And now everyone can see what I was talking about in my speech. They can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore." 3 days after the incident at Westridge Academy, the Washington home had become an unofficial extension of the FBI Civil Rights Division. Marcus sat at the dining room table, surrounded by reports and legal documents, carefully maintaining the delicate balance between his role as an FBI deputy director and his position as Zara's father. "Johnson is leading the official investigation," he explained to his wife, Layla, a corporate attorney who had cut short a business trip to return home after the incident. "I'm recused from direct involvement, but I'm consulting on the legal framework." Layla nodded, her expression a mixture of fury and determination that mirrored her husband's. "And the school board's offer?" Marcus grimaced. $20,000 and an apology that admits no wrongdoing. "Provided we sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop any potential legal claims." He shook his head. "They're more concerned with their reputation than addressing the actual problem." Upstairs, Zara sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The damage to her hair was painfully visible, uneven patches where the braids had been cut, leaving a jagged landscape across her scalp. She had refused to leave the house since returning from the hospital, declining friends' visits and turning down offers to help fix her hair. The physical wounds were healing, but the psychological impact remained raw. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Opening it, she found a message from an unfamiliar number. "Zara. My name is Ayanna Jackson. I'm a celebrity hairstylist who specializes in natural hair restoration. I saw what happened to you, and I want to help. No publicity, no cameras. Just one black woman supporting another. Let me know if you're interested." For the first time in days, Zara felt a flicker of hope. At the FBI field office, Special Agent Tamara Johnson reviewed the growing evidence against Officer Richard Caldwell. "We've accessed his personal devices pursuant to the warrant," she informed her team. "His online footprint is concerning. He's a member of several private groups with explicit white supremacist content." She displayed screenshots on the conference room screen, revealing Caldwell's participation in forums with names like Pure America and Heritage Protection League. "These aren't just casual associations," Johnson continued. "He's an active contributor, particularly in threads about cultural preservation in education and maintaining standards in diverse environments, both euphemisms for promoting white supremacist ideologies in schools." The digital forensics team had also uncovered a trove of emails between Principal Hartwell and various school board members over the past 3 years. The correspondence revealed a disturbing pattern. Discussions about maintaining the school's culture by subtly discouraging the success of black students through higher disciplinary standards and lower teacher expectations. "They were careful with their language," explained the lead analyst, "but the intent becomes clear when you see the pattern across hundreds of communications. They tracked the racial demographics of the school obsessively, particularly concerned when the percentage of minority students reached what they called tipping points in various programs." Meanwhile, the school board was growing desperate to contain the situation. Their initial settlement offer to the Washington family had been firmly rejected, leading to increasingly panicked meetings. "We need to resolve this quickly," insisted Gerald Hoffman, the board president. "The longer this drags on, the worse the publicity." "Perhaps we should increase the offer," suggested another member. $50,000 might be more persuasive." The board's attorney shook his head. This isn't about money for them. Washington is a high-ranking FBI official with a spotless reputation who just watched his daughter be assaulted on video. No reasonable amount will make this go away. Outside Westridge Academy, daily protests had formed. Community members, civil rights organizations, and students from neighboring schools gathered with signs demanding accountability and systemic change. The demonstrations remained peaceful but grew larger each day, attracting media attention that kept the story in the national spotlight. Inside their home, Marcus and Layla discussed the school board's latest offer with Zara. They're proposing a significant financial settlement and promising to implement new diversity training, Marcus explained. They're also offering to transfer you to any private school of your choice with a full scholarship. Zara looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reading messages of support from across the country. And what would we have to do? Sign a non-disclosure agreement, Layla replied. We couldn't discuss what happened publicly, and all pending investigations would be closed. Zara's expression hardened. So they pay us off, pretend to change. And everything goes back to normal once the cameras leave? Her parents exchanged glances, pride evident in their eyes despite the circumstances. That's our assessment as well, Marcus agreed. Which is why we're declining the offer unless you feel differently. Zara shook her head firmly. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about every black student at that school, past, present, and future. As the investigation continued, the Washington family began receiving disturbing messages. At first, they were anonymous comments on social media, but they quickly escalated to emails sent directly to Marcus's personal account and calls to their unlisted home number. We know where you live, read one message. Back off or face consequences. The FBI immediately assigned a security detail to the family, treating the threats as credible given the connections being uncovered between Officer Caldwell and organized white supremacist groups. Marcus's position at the FBI also came under attack from political opponents. Senator James Harrington, known for his opposition to civil rights enforcement, called for an ethics investigation. Deputy Director Washington is clearly using his position to wage a personal vendetta against the school and its employees, Harrington claimed during a news conference. This is a local disciplinary matter that has been weaponized for political purposes. The Department of Justice firmly defended Marcus, issuing a statement clarifying that he had properly recused himself from the official investigation, while the evidence clearly warranted federal involvement. The Department of Education launched its own separate civil rights investigation into Westridge Academy, expanding the scope beyond the incident with Zara to examine the school's overall treatment of minority students. As public interest in the case grew, Zara's speech from the competition surfaced online. A student had recorded it, and the video quickly went viral, garnering millions of views. The eloquent words about racial injustice, delivered just hours before Zara became a victim of that very injustice, created a powerful narrative that resonated across the country. The school's alumni organization fractured over the controversy. Many recent graduates expressed horror at what had happened and shared their own experiences of racial tension at Westridge. Older alumni, particularly major donors, defended the school's traditions and suggested the incident had been blown out of proportion. Westridge Academy has a 60-year history of academic excellence, wrote one prominent alumnus in a letter to the local newspaper. This unfortunate incident, while regrettable, should not overshadow decades of positive contributions to the community. The letter prompted a scathing response from a black graduate from the class of 2010. The academic excellence came at the cost of daily microaggressions, higher disciplinary standards for students of color, and the constant pressure to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. What happened to Zara Washington wasn't an aberration. It was just the first time the masks slipped completely off. As Zara began working with Ayanna, the hairstylist who had reached out, she discovered other victims of discrimination at Westridge. Former students contacted her through social media, sharing stories that had gone unreported or unaddressed. They told me I couldn't wear my natural hair for graduation photos, wrote one young woman who had graduated 3 years earlier. Said it wouldn't look professional enough for the yearbook. Another shared how she had been repeatedly disciplined for attitude problems when she questioned racially insensitive comments from teachers. I transferred schools my junior year because I couldn't take it anymore, she explained. But I always felt like I had failed somehow by leaving instead of fighting. The local police department, meanwhile, worked to distance themselves from Officer Caldwell. He was not employed by the county police department, their spokesperson emphasized in a statement. School resource officers are hired by the school district after basic certification. His actions do not reflect the values or training standards of our department. Are you shocked by the evidence uncovered against Officer Caldwell and Principal Hartwell? Comment number 1 if you think the school board's offer of money and an NDA is insulting to Zara and her family. Do you admire Zara for refusing to be silenced with a settlement? Hit that like button if you believe standing up against systemic racism takes tremendous courage, and subscribe to follow this powerful story of justice. What consequences do you think Officer Caldwell and Principal Hartwell should face for their actions? Let's continue to see how this case unfolds as we move into the preliminary hearing. 1 month after the incident at Westridge Academy, the county courthouse steps were crowded with media representatives, protesters, and curious onlookers as the preliminary hearing for Officer Richard Caldwell began. The former school resource officer faced multiple charges, including assault on a minor, civil rights violations, and official misconduct. Inside the courtroom, Caldwell sat beside his defense attorney, his previously confident demeanor replaced by a sullen scowl. His police uniform was gone, replaced by a conservative suit that seemed slightly too large for his frame. At the prosecution table, Assistant U.S. Attorney Vanessa Clark organized her documents with methodical precision. The case had been deemed significant enough to warrant federal prosecution given the civil rights implications. Principal Edward Hartwell would have his own separate hearing the following week. Charged as an accomplice and facing additional counts related to the cover-up attempts discovered during the investigation, Judge Elaine Watkins entered the courtroom. Her reputation for fairness and strict adherence to constitutional principles well known in legal circles. After the formalities of opening the proceedings, she addressed the defense's motion to dismiss the case. "I've reviewed your arguments, Mr. Spencer," she said to Caldwell's attorney, "and I find them wholly without merit. The evidence presented is more than sufficient to proceed." Motion denied. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the morning progressed. Protesters supporting Zara and calling for justice stood on one side of the street, while a smaller but vocal group defending Caldwell and traditional school discipline gathered opposite. Police maintained a buffer zone between the groups as occasional shouts were exchanged. Inside, the prosecution presented their opening arguments. "This case is not about school discipline," Assistant U.S. Attorney Clark stated firmly. "It is about a man who abused his authority to publicly humiliate and physically assault a 15-year-old girl because of her race and because she dared to speak about racial injustice. The evidence will show that the defendant's actions were not only excessive but deliberately cruel, racially motivated, and part of a pattern of behavior that the school administration knowingly enabled." Defense attorney Spencer countered by attempting to frame the incident as a simple case of enforcing school policies. Officer Caldwell was doing exactly what he was hired to do: maintain order and enforce the rules established by Westridge Academy. While his methods may seem strict to some, they were within the scope of his authority, as delegated by the school administration. The prosecution's first witness was Emily Roberts, Zara's friend who had recorded the incident. Her voice shook slightly as she described what she had witnessed, but her testimony remained clear and consistent. Officer Caldwell seemed almost happy when he was cutting her hair, Emily testified. He was smiling, making comments about taming her hair. And when the scissors cut her scalp and she started bleeding, he didn't stop or check if she was okay. He just kept cutting. The defense tried to undermine Emily's credibility during cross-examination, suggesting she had edited the video or had a personal bias against Caldwell. "Isn't it true that you had been disciplined by Officer Caldwell previously for dress code violations yourself?" Spencer asked. "No," Emily replied firmly. "I never had any interaction with him before that day. And the video hasn't been edited. You can check the metadata." As the preliminary hearing progressed, the prosecution built a methodical case demonstrating premeditation. They presented text messages between Caldwell and Principal Hartwell from immediately after Zara's speech, discussing the need to make an example of her before she became too influential with the other students. They also introduced evidence that Caldwell had researched the Crown Act the night before the incident, indicating he was aware that his actions would violate state law. The defense strategy shifted halfway through the hearing, abandoning the just following policy approach in favor of attempting to portray Zara as a problem student who had provoked the response. Miss Washington had a history of challenging authority and creating disruptions, Spencer claimed, introducing a file supposedly documenting disciplinary issues. The move backfired spectacularly when the prosecution requested to examine the file and discovered it contained fabricated incidents and had been created after the assault took place. Furthermore, when they presented Zara's actual academic record, straight A's, perfect attendance, and glowing teacher recommendations, the contrast could not have been more stark. "Your Honor," Clark addressed the judge, "the defense is not only grasping at straws but actively manufacturing evidence to defame the victim. We request sanctions for this blatant attempt to mislead the court." Judge Watkins's expression darkened as she examined the fabricated file. "Mr. Spencer, I expect better from attorneys in my courtroom. You will face a bar review for this conduct. Consider yourself fortunate I'm not declaring a mistrial." Outside the courtroom, a sophisticated social media campaign attempted to discredit Marcus Washington, suggesting he was abusing his FBI position for personal vengeance. Digital forensics experts traced the campaign to a PR firm with connections to several Westridge Academy board members, adding another layer to the expanding investigation. The FBI conducted a thorough internal review of Marcus's actions following the incident, finding he had properly recused himself from the official investigation while acting appropriately as a parent protecting his child. The review concluded with a statement supporting Marcus and condemning the attempts to discredit him. Westridge Academy implemented emergency policy changes in an attempt to salvage their reputation. They announced a new, inclusive dress code that explicitly protected cultural hairstyles, mandatory diversity training for all staff, and the appointment of Dr. Michelle Jordan, a black educator with expertise in equity issues, as interim principal, the first black woman to lead the school in its 60-year history. On the fourth day of the hearing, Zara took the stand. Despite intensive preparation with the prosecution team, nothing could fully prepare a 15-year-old for facing her attacker in court. Nevertheless, she carried herself with remarkable composure, answering questions clearly and maintaining eye contact with the prosecutor. "Can you tell the court what Officer Caldwell said to you while cutting your hair?" Clark asked gently. Zara took a deep breath. "He said my wild hair needed to be tamed. He said I needed to learn that fancy speeches don't put you above the rules. When I told him the Crown Act protected my hairstyle, he said laws made for your kind don't apply in my school." During cross-examination, defense attorney Spencer attempted to fluster Zara by suggesting she had somehow misunderstood Caldwell's well-intentioned discipline. Her response silenced the courtroom. "Mr. Spencer, I understand the difference between discipline and humiliation. Officer Caldwell handcuffed me to a chair, cut my hair while making racist comments, and continued even when he drew blood. If that's your definition of well-intentioned, I suggest you examine your own biases." The prosecution called expert witnesses to provide context about the cultural significance of black hair and the historical use of forced hair cutting as a means of control and humiliation. Dr. Kimberly Williams, a professor of African American Studies, explained, hair has profound cultural significance in black communities. For centuries, forced cutting of black people's hair has been used as a tool of domination and dehumanization. What happened to Ms. Washington cannot be separated from this historical context. The most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Officer Caldwell's former partner from his previous school posting. Officer James Rodriguez had initially been reluctant to come forward. But after seeing the video of Zara's assault, he contacted the prosecution. This wasn't the first time, Rodriguez testified. There were at least 3 incidents at Lakeside High where Caldwell targeted black students for their hairstyles. The administration there covered it up each time, transferring the students to different schools and giving their families small settlements with confidentiality agreements. By the end of the week-long preliminary hearing, Judge Watkins had heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, there is more than sufficient cause to proceed to trial on all charges, she ruled. Furthermore, given the serious nature of these charges and the new evidence of prior similar conduct, I am denying the defense's request for modified bail conditions. The defendant will remain under house arrest with electronic monitoring until trial. As the Washington family left the courthouse surrounded by their security detail, they were met with cheers from supporters. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, but Layla squeezed Zara's hand in silent celebration of this first victory on the long road to justice. 6 months after the assault at Westridge Academy, the full trial of Officer Richard Caldwell was in its second week. The case had maintained national attention, with major news outlets providing daily coverage and legal analysts debating every development. The courtroom was consistently filled to capacity, with a lottery system implemented for public seating. Zara Washington had returned to Westridge Academy 3 months earlier, her decision to go back rather than transfer elsewhere a deliberate statement. Running away would send the wrong message, she had explained to her parents. This is about changing the system, not escaping it. She attended classes with a court-ordered protective order that prevented any school staff involved in the incident from approaching or contacting her. Her hair had partially regrown, though still uneven in places, and she wore it in a short natural style that had become something of a symbol among student activists. The school environment had changed dramatically since the incident. The student body was sharply divided between those who supported the reforms being implemented by interim principal Dr. Jordan and those who resented the changes to tradition. Friendships fractured along these lines, with some students who had witnessed the assault suffering particular conflict. Many felt guilty for their inaction but were pressured by parents and peers to move past it and stop dwelling on one unfortunate incident. During a critical day of testimony from school board members, an anonymous bomb threat was called into the courthouse, forcing an immediate evacuation. As security personnel swept the building, FBI cybersecurity experts traced the call to an IP address registered to the home of Walter Pembroke, a senior member of the Westridge Academy Board of Trustees. When confronted with this evidence, Pembroke claimed his computer must have been hacked. But a forensic examination revealed the threat had been sent from his personal device while logged into his accounts. This discovery sent shockwaves through the case, suggesting a level of desperation among the school leadership that few had anticipated. With Pembroke's arrest for making terrorist threats, the prosecution's case took on new dimensions. Assistant U.S. Attorney Clark approached Officer Caldwell's defense team with a plea offer, reduced charges in exchange for testimony about the broader conspiracy within the school administration. After intensive negotiations with his attorneys, Caldwell agreed to the deal, recognizing that the evidence against him was overwhelming and his best chance to avoid maximum sentencing lay in cooperation. In a closed-door session with prosecutors, Caldwell revealed that Westridge Academy had an unofficial but explicit policy of discouraging certain elements, a euphemism for racial minorities, from gaining too much prominence in the school. Principal Hartwell told me when I was hired that my job was to maintain the school's traditional character, Caldwell testified. He said there were scholarship students who didn't fit the Westridge profile but had to be admitted for diversity statistics. My role was to ensure they understood their place in the hierarchy. Most damning was Caldwell's account of a meeting with several board members before the incident with Zara. They were concerned about her speech and the standing ovation she received. One board member said she was getting too big for her britches and setting the wrong example for other scholarship students. They wanted her brought down a notch. While executing a search warrant at Principal Hartwell's home, FBI agents discovered a personal journal in which he had documented his thoughts about the changing demographics at Westridge with explicitly racist language. The quality of our institution cannot be maintained with the increasing presence of students who lack the cultural background to appreciate our traditions, one entry read. While we must accept some diversity for practical reasons, we must find ways to discourage those who would change rather than assimilate to our standards. The Department of Education expanded its investigation to the entire school district, uncovering similar patterns at other schools under the same board governance. Investigators found evidence of systematic efforts to push out minority students who made waves through excessive discipline, academic discouragement, and creating hostile environments that prompted voluntary withdrawals. As the trial progressed, Marcus Washington faced professional challenges from the political attention surrounding the case. Congressional hearings questioned whether his role at the FBI presented conflicts of interest. Though his superiors continued to defend his integrity and proper recusal from the official investigation. Zara, meanwhile, channeled her experience into activism, organizing a student walkout demanding educational equity that spread to schools across the district. Students wore green ribbons, the color Zara had worn in her hair the day of her assault, as a symbol of solidarity. Support for Zara came from an unexpected quarter when Jasmine Powell, a former Westridge student who had left the school 5 years earlier, came forward with a similar story. They didn't cut my hair, but they made it clear my natural hairstyle wasn't welcome. Jasmine testified. I was told I wouldn't be allowed to participate in graduation unless I straightened my hair. When my parents complained, we were offered a small settlement with a confidentiality agreement. I've been silent for 5 years, but seeing what happened to Zara made me realize my silence only protected the people who hurt me. Jasmine's testimony opened the floodgates, with dozens of former students sharing similar experiences dating back decades. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable. A systematic effort to minimize Black achievement and presence at Westridge Academy through both overt and subtle means of discouragement and discrimination. Officer Caldwell's defense crumbled under the weight of this evidence. Following his plea agreement, he testified against Principal Hartwell and the school board members who had directed his actions. I was told to make an example of her, he admitted on the stand. They wanted something public, something that would send a message to the other Black students without explicitly mentioning race. Hartwell suggested the hair because he knew how important it was in their culture. With Caldwell's testimony and the mountain of evidence collected through the expanded investigation, the jury deliberations were expected to be brief. However, as the case neared its conclusion, the threats against the Washington family intensified. Marcus received photographs of their home taken from nearby locations, suggesting surveillance by hostile parties. The FBI security detail was doubled, and the family temporarily relocated to a safe house. Digital forensics traced the threats to an encrypted network used by a group calling itself Heritage Defenders, which included several wealthy Westridge alumni and had connections to known white supremacist organizations. The group had apparently been funding the legal defense of Caldwell and Hartwell through shell companies, seeing the case as a battlefield in a larger cultural war. As the jury entered deliberations, tension throughout the community reached a fever pitch. Supporters on both sides gathered outside the courthouse, held vigils, and flooded social media with competing hashtags. After just 7 hours, the jury notified the court they had reached a verdict. Judge Watkins scheduled the announcement for the following morning, allowing security to prepare for the public response. That night, In the safety of their temporary residence, Marcus pulled Zara aside. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he told her quietly, "you've already won. You stood up, you spoke truth, and you changed things. No verdict can take that away." Zara nodded, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years. "I know," she replied. "This was never just about punishing Officer Caldwell. It was about exposing the whole system." The courthouse steps were packed with people as the Washington family arrived for the verdict announcement. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing the scene for live broadcasts across the nation. Inside the crowded courtroom, Officer Richard Caldwell sat rigidly beside his attorneys, his face a mask of resignation. Principal Edward Hartwell occupied a separate table with his defense team, his once confident demeanor replaced by nervous fidgeting. Judge Elaine Watkins entered and called the court to order, her expression giving no hint of what was to come. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked the foreperson, a middle-aged black woman who had remained stoically attentive throughout the lengthy trial. "We have, Your Honor," the woman confirmed, handing the verdict forms to the bailiff. As the judge reviewed the documents, the courtroom held its collective breath. In the case of the United States versus Richard Caldwell, on the count of assault on a minor, the jury finds the defendant guilty. A murmur ran through the courtroom. On the count of civil rights violations, the jury finds the defendant guilty. On the count of official misconduct, the jury finds the defendant guilty. The judge continued through all charges, with "guilty," the unanimous verdict on each count. She then read the verdicts for Principal Hartwell. Guilty of being an accomplice to assault, guilty of civil rights violations, guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of conspiracy to violate civil rights. When the last charge had been read, Judge Watkins addressed the courtroom. "I will hear victim impact statements and determine sentencing in 2 weeks. Until then, both defendants will remain in custody." The following day, Judge Watkins delivered a powerful statement that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "The Constitution promises equal protection under the law for all citizens, regardless of race, religion, or background." What happened at Westridge Academy was not merely an assault on a young woman, it was an assault on the foundational principles of our democracy. When those entrusted with educating and protecting our children instead use their authority to humiliate and harm them based on their race, they betray not only those children but the entire nation. Her sentences reflected the gravity of these words. Caldwell received 5 years in prison, substantial financial penalties, and a lifetime ban from working in schools or law enforcement. Hartwell received 3 years, financial penalties, and similar professional restrictions. Both were required to complete extensive civil rights training during and after their incarceration. The State Education Department, acting on recommendations from the Department of Justice, took the unprecedented step of dissolving the Westridge Academy School Board. A state-appointed Reconstruction Committee was established to implement comprehensive reforms, with Dr. Michelle Jordan appointed as permanent principal. As part of her recovery process, Zara worked with Ayanna Jackson, the celebrity hairstylist who had reached out months earlier. By the time of the final sentencing hearing, Zara's hair had fully regrown, and she wore an elaborate set of braids adorned with traditional beads, a deliberate statement about cultural pride and resilience. The image of her ascending the courthouse steps, head held high with her beautiful braids catching the sunlight, became an iconic photograph that appeared on magazine covers nationwide. Following the successful prosecution, Marcus Washington was promoted to head a newly created FBI task force focused on educational discrimination, allowing him to transform his family's painful experience into systemic change for others. The school formerly known as Westridge Academy underwent a name change, becoming Ida B. Wells Academy after the pioneering civil rights activist and journalist. The curriculum was reformed to include comprehensive education on racial justice, the history of civil rights in America, and cultural competency. Emily and Zara, whose friendship had deepened through their shared experience, co-founded a student advocacy group called Voice and Action, That quickly spread to schools across the country. The organization provided resources for students experiencing discrimination and training for young activists seeking to create more equitable educational environments. Ms. Rivera, the Spanish teacher who had attempted to intervene during the assault, became Dr. Jordan's assistant principal, helping to implement the sweeping changes that transformed the school's culture. 6 months after the sentencing, Zara received an invitation that left her momentarily speechless, a request to visit the White House to discuss educational equity with the president. As she stood in the Oval Office sharing her story and her vision for American education, she recognized how far her journey had taken her from that terrible day in the school auditorium. The experience had not defined her, her response to it had. The case inspired new federal legislation, informally known as Zara's Law, that strengthened protections for cultural expression in schools and established clear guidelines for appropriate disciplinary measures. The law included specific provisions prohibiting discrimination based on hairstyles and cultural attire, with substantial penalties for violations. 1 year after the assault, on the anniversary of her original speech competition, Zara delivered a new address at the reformed Ida B. Wells Academy. The auditorium was filled with students, parents, educators, and media representatives eager to hear from the young woman whose courage had catalyzed such significant change. "A year ago, I stood on this stage and spoke about invisible shackles," she began. "I didn't know then how visible those shackles would become, or how together we would begin to break them. What happened in this room was painful and traumatic, but it exposed the truth that had been hidden for too long. Sometimes, that's what progress requires, the courage to expose painful truths so that healing can begin." Marcus watched from the audience, balancing his higher-profile FBI role with his commitment to being present for his daughter's important moments. His security detail remained in place. The threats had diminished but not disappeared entirely, a reminder that progress often comes with resistance. In an unexpected development, Richard Caldwell wrote a letter from prison that was delivered to the Washington family through his attorney. Unlike the perfunctory apologies often crafted for legal purposes, his words suggested genuine reflection. "I cannot undo what I did, and I do not expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that I am confronting the racist beliefs that led me to treat you as less than human. Your dignity in the face of my cruelty has forced me to question everything I thought I knew. I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting a child in my care." The final scene of transformation came full circle when Zara began mentoring Aaliyah, a 14-year-old black student facing discrimination at a neighboring school district. They met at a local library. Zara, now 16 and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had faced the worst and emerged stronger. "I'm scared to speak up," Aaliyah admitted. "What if they do something to me like what happened to you?" Zara reached across the table, taking the younger girl's hand. "They tried to cut away my identity, but instead, they showed the world who they really were. Your voice is your power. Never let them silence it." She smiled, touching one of her braids. "And remember, you're never alone in this fight. There are people ready to stand with you, you just have to be brave enough to raise your voice first." As Zara's story spread across the country, it became more than a cautionary tale about racism and abuse of power. It became a blueprint for resistance, resilience, and transformation. What happened at Westridge Academy had been born of hatred and fear, but what emerged from it was something powerful and hopeful, a reminder that justice, while not always swift, can arrive with transformative force when brave individuals refuse to be silenced. What do you think about how Zara turned her traumatic experience into positive change? Comment below if you believe young voices like hers are essential in the fight against systemic racism. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of standing up against discrimination. Thank you for joining me for this journey through a difficult but ultimately inspiring story of courage and justice. Remember, as Zara said, your voice is your power. never let anyone silence it. Zara's story teaches us that standing up against injustice often comes at a personal cost, but silence only perpetuates broken systems. Her courage transformed individual trauma into collective change, demonstrating how one voice can catalyze reform when backed by truth and dignity. The case exposed how racism can hide behind policies and traditions, requiring vigilance and documentation to dismantle. It highlighted the importance of allies like Emily and Ms. Rivera, who risked their positions to do what was right. Marcus showed that proper authority can be wielded justly, maintaining professional integrity while fighting for his daughter. Most importantly, Zara's experience reveals that justice isn't just about punishment, but about transforming institutions to prevent future harm. The cultural significance of black hair and identity became a national conversation, educating millions about discrimination's subtle forms. Real change requires both individual courage and institutional accountability, with systems willing to acknowledge their failures and rebuild with equity at their foundation. What moments in this story resonated most deeply with you? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Comment below with your thoughts on how schools can better protect students from racial bias. If Zara's courage inspired you, hit that like button to support stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience. Subscribe to hear more powerful narratives about those fighting against discrimination in America. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the impact of racial bias in educational settings or anyone who might feel alone in their own struggle. Thank you for bearing witness to Zara's journey. Remember that your voice matters in creating the just world we all deserve.